For Catherine Vance, a picture-perfect life on the Upper East Side was about to implode. But what her powerful husband didn't know was that he wasn't just breaking a marriage. He was unleashing a queen. A piece whispered about in hushed, envious tones across the city's elite, a piece Richard Vance had sworn was a surprise for his and Catherine's 5th anniversary. But here it was, nestled against the porcelain skin of Tiffany Sterling, his impossibly young, impossibly blonde assistant. Little did Richard know, the real picture of the evening hadn't even been taken yet. Because just beyond the glare of the paparazzi, another car, a silent obsidian Rolls-Royce, was pulling up to the curb. It breathed in the spaces between the minimalist Italian furniture and coiled around the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. At 5 months pregnant, she felt like a ghost haunting the museum-like perfection of her own home. A life she had once naively believed would be the glue to mend the cracks in her marriage. Richard Vance, a man whose ambition was as sharp and cutting as his tailored Armani suits, had become a collection of echoes. The echo of his laughter from a time when it was meant for her. The echo of his footsteps as he left before sunrise. The echo of his voice on the phone, clipped and dismissive. "It's for the company, darling. You understand?" She always said she did. The evening of the annual Children's Health Foundation Gala had loomed on her calendar for months. It was the event of the season, a glittering affair, where New York's old money and new ambition collided in a symphony of champagne flutes and feigned camaraderie. Richard was a major benefactor, his company, Vance Holdings, a primary sponsor. Their attendance was not just expected. He had loosened his tie, his back to her, and announced he had to fly to Zurich for an emergency board meeting. A sudden merger, he'd said, the words practiced and smooth. "It's unavoidable, Catherine. You shouldn't go alone, not in your condition. Just rest. We'll make it up." The promise was as hollow as the rest of him. Catherine had learned to read the subtle tells, the way his left eye twitched when he lied, the slight tightening of his jaw. She simply nodded at the beautiful wife and watched him pack a small suitcase with an efficiency that spoke of practice. The lie unraveled with humiliating ease. It was from a gossip blog, Park Avenue Whispers, featuring a candid shot from the day before. On his arm, clinging to him like expensive ivy, was Tiffany Sterling. Tiffany, his new executive assistant, a woman half Catherine's age with a predatory smile and a wardrobe funded by a salary that seemed impossibly generous for her role. Looks like Vance Holdings is finalizing a very different kind of merger. Is Zurich the new code for the Hamptons? The air left Catherine's lungs. It was the brazenness of it. He was flaunting it. The realization hit Catherine with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just replacing her, he was erasing her. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the 5 years she had dedicated to being his partner, hosting his dinners, charming his investors, standing by his side as he built his empire. It was about the child she carried, a child he had claimed to want, now reduced to an inconvenient footnote in his new narrative. Her grief, however, slowly began to curdle, hardening into something else. He expected her to stay home, to be the pregnant, forgotten wife weeping into a silk pillow. The phone rang once, twice, a voice smooth as aged whiskey and warm with a kindness she hadn't heard in years answered. "I need a favor and I need a date to the Children's Health Foundation Gala tonight." "I assume," Sebastian Thorne said, his tone shifting from surprise to a low, protective growl, "that you have a point to make." "I have more than a point," Catherine replied, looking at her reflection in the polished chrome of the faucet. A woman with tear-streaked cheeks, but eyes of burning steel. The rain began to fall as Catherine spoke, fat cinematic drops that smeared the perfect view of the city into an impressionistic blur. On the other end of the line, Sebastian Thorne listened without interruption, a skill he had perfected long ago. Sebastian and Catherine had a history etched in the libraries of Columbia University, not the ballrooms of Manhattan. They had been inseparable, two scholarship kids fueled by late-night coffee and a shared ravenous ambition. He was a prodigy in computer science, seeing patterns in code that others couldn't fathom. They had dated for 2 years. She hadn't listened. When she finished her story, her voice raw with unshed tears. The silence that followed was different from the one in her apartment. "His table is number 1, front and center, I presume?" Sebastian asked, his voice devoid of any, "I told you so." "Of course," Catherine whispered. "He wants to be seen." "He will be," Sebastian said, and for the first time, Catherine could hear the ice in his tone. It was the calm, chilling voice of a man who didn't make threats, but rather stated inevitable outcomes. "A car will be waiting for you downstairs." "The dress?" "The emerald one. You said it was the only thing Richard ever bought you that felt like it was for you, not for his image. Wear it for yourself tonight." He remembered. After all this time, he remembered a passing comment about a dress. After the call, Catherine moved with a newfound purpose. She pushed past the muted tasteful gowns Richard preferred, the beiges, the navies, the charcoals, and found it in the very back encased in a preservation bag. It was a dress of life, of vibrancy, not of mourning. As she slipped it on, she felt a piece of her old self click back into place. Inside lay the opulent, heavy pieces Richard had gifted her over the years. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened a small worn wooden box tucked away in a drawer. Inside was a pair of delicate vintage moonstone earrings. They had been a gift from Sebastian for her 21st birthday, bought from a dusty antique shop downtown. They glowed with a soft internal light, a quiet defiance against the garish sparkle of Richard's world. This was Catherine, strong, determined, and ready for battle. Punctually 90 minutes after her call, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. She walked through the silent penthouse, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on the polished marble floors. She didn't look back. The elevator doors opened onto the pristine lobby. The doorman, accustomed to Richard's fleet of expensive but soulless German cars, did a double take. Revenge was a messy emotional affair. She was reclaiming her story, her dignity, and her future. It was a stage and every guest was an actor playing their part. She was radiant in a crimson gown so aggressively tailored it seemed shrink-wrapped to her body. And there against her skin was the starlight Kalia, its diamonds catching the light with every sycophantic laugh she offered. Gossip columnist Beatrice Fairfax, a woman whose pen could make or break reputations, watched them with narrowed eyes. "It's a bold move, even for Richard," she murmured to her companion. "Catherine is 5 months pregnant, to bring his little intern here. It's not just tasteless, it's a declaration of war," the whispers rippled through the room. Was she at home, heartbroken? Had she finally been discarded? Richard could feel the speculation, the mixture of awe and disapproval, and it fueled him. He thrived on audacity. The clamor of the paparazzi outside, which had died down, suddenly erupted with renewed frenzy. The flashes were more intense, more frantic. A collective murmur rippled inward from the doors as heads began to turn. Silence fell over the ballroom. The emerald silk of her gown cascaded over her pregnant form, not as a concession, but as a statement of regal femininity. The moonstone earrings cast a gentle, ethereal glow against her skin. Her expression was not one of sadness or anger. It was one of serene, unshakable confidence. She was not a woman scorned. She was a queen arriving at her court. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored black tuxedo, but he wore it with an authority that made every other man in the room, including Richard, look like a boy playing dress-up. His hand was gently placed on Catherine's back, a gesture not of possession, but of unwavering support. Richard's face, which had been flush with triumph, went pale. The champagne flute in his hand trembled slightly. He stared, his mind, struggling to process the scene. This was impossible. Who was this man? He knew the face, of course. Everyone knew, Sebastian Thorne, but the connection to Catherine was a devastating blank in his understanding of the world. Every eye in the room was now on the woman she had been brought here to replace, and Catherine was effortlessly, devastatingly winning. "Is that Sebastian Thorne? Richard looks like he's seen a ghost. The game has just been changed." They didn't head for a corner table. Sebastian guided Catherine with practiced ease directly towards the center of the room on a collision course with table 1. As they approached, Richard finally broke from his stupor. He put his champagne down with a thud and took a step forward, his face a mask of fury. He hissed, his voice low and menacing. Before she could answer, Sebastian stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle but unmistakable barrier. "Pity." "Good evening, Richard," Sebastian said, his voice quiet, but carrying in the sudden lull. And as Catherine met the stunned, furious eyes of her husband, she knew this was not an ending. It was the beginning of his. This was a coup. Beaumont, a man of old money and even older principles, had always been quietly skeptical of Richard Vance's flashy, aggressive style. He rose, a gesture of respect he rarely afforded anyone, and kissed her hand. "Please join us." The invitation was a powerful signal. As Catherine and Sebastian sat, a waiter, seemingly appearing from nowhere, placed 2 glasses of sparkling water with lime before them. Their presence was anticipated and catered to. Across the room, Richard watched this scene unfold with a mixture of rage and panic. "I have no idea," Richard snarled, his mind racing. He knew Thorne by reputation, a recluse, a genius, a man who moved markets with a single decision. He had been repeatedly and politely stonewalled. He couldn't let it stand. He had to reassert control. He stopped at Harold Beaumont's table, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. Catherine looked up at him, her expression placid. "Richard, you're making a scene," he hissed, leaning down. Richard's face flushed a deep mottled red. He was being played with, openly mocked. He grabbed Catherine's arm. "We are leaving now." The movement was lightning fast and fluid. "You will not touch her again. You will return to your table, and you will enjoy the rest of your evening. If you cause even the slightest distress to Catherine, I will make one phone call, and by the time the sun rises tomorrow, Vance Holdings will be a footnote in a textbook on failed, hostile takeovers." The threat was delivered with such cold, absolute certainty that Richard felt a genuine sliver of fear. This wasn't the blustering of a business rival. It was a promise from a man who had the power to execute it. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. He stared at Sebastian, who finally turned to meet his gaze. He was the prey. The walk back feeling like miles. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been shattered and remade. He was a king in X in his own court. For the rest of the evening, Catherine was the undeniable star. People flocked to her table. Investors, socialites, board members of other companies, as all eager to pay their respects to see and be seen with her and Sebastian. She discussed charity initiatives with Beaumont's wife. Richard, meanwhile, was a pariah. The Starlight Collier meant to be her crowning glory was now a symbol of her spectacular miscalculation. Late in the evening during the charity auction, the final blow was struck. Bidding was fierce, quickly reaching $200,000. $300,000, he boomed. A hush fell. Just as the auctioneer was about to close, a calm voice called out from Catherine's table. $1 million, Sebastian said without even bothering to lift his paddle. The auctioneer was dumbfounded. "Old." He finally managed to stammer out. Sebastian leaned over to Catherine. "I hear Italy is lovely in the spring," he said softly for only her to hear. "A good place to rest before the baby arrives." It was the ultimate power play, an act of casual, breathtaking generosity that simultaneously supported the charity and utterly neutered Richard. It was about the ease with which it was spent. Richard had offered a number to bolster his ego. As the gala wound down, Richard and Tiffany were among the first to leave, slipping out a side door to avoid the press. But it was too late. The story was already written. When Catherine and Sebastian finally rose to depart, they were met with a wave of respectful nods and admiring glances. Outside, the Obsidian Rolls-Royce was waiting. The driver held the door, and as Catherine slid inside, she looked back at the grand ballroom, a place that had been the backdrop for so much of her unhappiness. Tonight it had been the stage for her liberation. The war was not over, but the most decisive battle had been won, and she had won it without saying a word. The fallout from the gala was not a slow burn. It was a detonation. The headline was devastating. The Vance Gala, a king dethroned before his coronation for Richard. They're concerned about the optics. Optics? It has nothing to do with the company. It does when you publicly alienate your wife and she finds comfort with Sebastian. If he calls in his markers or influences them to break their leases, we're exposed. Terribly exposed. And the funding for the new tech division. Richard, the primary investor we've been courting, is a known partner of Thorne's. They led their meeting this morning. No reason given. He had seen Sebastian as a personal threat, a rival for Catherine's affection. He hadn't considered the professional ramifications. Sebastian Thorne wasn't just a billionaire. His second call was from Tiffany. She was hysterical. She sobbed. Release a statement. His patience gone. You were a diversion. He hung up on her, the callousness of his own words barely registering. Meanwhile, Catherine was in a calm, quiet war room. He didn't just commit adultery. He broadcasted it. Catherine nodded, sipping her tea. She felt strangely detached, as if watching a film of someone else's life. Sebastian's team is also providing some ancillary information. Elenina continued, a predatory gleam in her eye. It appears that Vance Holdings has been engaging in some creative accounting regarding its real estate valuations. Specifically, Richard seems to have used company funds to secure the lease on a certain Miss Sterling's very expensive apartment and has been funneling money into a shell corporation that owns the jet he claimed to be taking to Zurich. It wasn't just infidelity. It was fraud. Catherine Eleanor asked, her voice softening slightly. We can go for blood. We can ruin him completely, or we can use this as leverage for a quiet, swift, and exceedingly generous settlement. But she also wanted justice. I want the penthouse. It will be my child's home. The terms are not negotiable. As he read the first page detailing the divorce filing, a freeze was simultaneously placed on all his personal and marital assets. The board meeting was a bloodbath, led by a stern, silver-haired director named Petersonen. Your public spectacle has jeopardized a 9-figure funding round and destabilized our relationship with our tenants. Richard Peterson thundered. The board is voting on a motion to suspend you as CEO pending a full internal investigation. His company, his kingdom, was being ripped from his grasp. He had thought himself untouchable. But in the space of 24 hours, the fortress he had built around himself had begun to crumble into dust. A slick, unfamiliar voice asked. Who is this? I'm Tiffany Sterling's attorney. Richard laughed, a harsh, broken sound. It was absurd. He had flown too close to the sun, and the fall was happening faster than he could have ever imagined. And he knew with a sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The press was relentless, camped outside his office building, and the penthouse he could no longer comfortably inhabit. Desperate, he did the only thing he could think of. He expected to meet her in a lawyer's office, a sterile adversarial environment. Instead, she agreed to see him at the penthouse. It was a strategic move designed to unnerve him, to remind him of the life he was losing. Penelope was there, sitting quietly in an armchair, a silent sentinel. And in the corner of the room, standing by the window and looking out at the park, was Sebastian Thorne. Not in any way that matters, Catherine said, her voice calm and even. She was sitting on the sofa, a file folder resting on the cushion beside her. She looked healthier than he had seen her in months, the stress replaced by a quiet resolve. Penelope is my friend. This was her territory now. He decided to try the one tactic he had always mastered: manipulation. This whole thing, it's a nightmare, my company, my reputation, it's all falling apart because of one misunderstanding. You're taking your mistress to a gala where I was meant to be wearing a necklace you told me was for me while lying that you were on another continent. That's not a misunderstanding, Richard. He flinched. I was under a lot of pressure. Tiffany meant nothing. It's our family. He leaned forward, trying to project sincerity. We can fix this. We can tell the world it was all a publicity stunt gone wrong. We can be a family. It's incredible, Richard, she said, shaking her head with a sort of academic curiosity. You really believe your own lies, don't you? You're sorry you miscalculated. His facade began to crack. He sneered, gesturing toward Sebastian. This has nothing to do with me, Richard. My choice, Catherine said, picking up the file folder, is to end this cleanly and quickly. She slid the folder across the coffee table. This is a postnuptial settlement offer. It leaves you with your company or what's left of it and enough seed money to start again. Richard scoffed, opening the folder. You're in no position to make demands. No, Richard, you won't, because this isn't Act 1. He picked up a tablet from the side table and placed it next to the folder. An account under Richard's name alone. The total was just over $50 million money he had systematically embezzled from his own company over the past 3 years. Richard froze his face, turning ashen. Where did you get that? You were so busy building your gilded cage. This is a complete record of your fraud. Catherine leaned forward. So, this is Act 3, Richard. Your choice. You won't be paying lawyers. You'll be paying for commissary privileges. The room was silent. Richard stared at the tablet at the undeniable methodical proof of his crimes. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his own cleverness. He had never imagined someone could simply peel back the layers of his deception with such ease. He looked at Catherine. He saw the strength he had tried to extinguish, the intelligence he had willfully ignored. He saw the mother of his child, a woman he had wronged so profoundly that she was now holding a gun to the head of his entire existence. He had been playing checkers. They had been playing chess. And this was checkmate. Without another word, he signed away his marriage, his home, and his future, all to save himself from his past. 9 months later, the first snow of winter was dusting the windows of a beautiful brownstone overlooking a quiet tree-lined street in Greenwich Village. He had her eyes, but a peacefulness that was all his own. The penthouse on the Upper East Side had been sold. The SEC, tipped off by an anonymous source, had launched a full-scale investigation into Vance Holdings. Anyway, Richard, stripped of his CEO title and facing shareholder lawsuits, had been forced to sell his controlling stake in the company for pennies on the dollar to a competitor. He had avoided prison time, but he was ruined, a pariah in the world he had once ruled. The last Catherine had heard, he was living in a rented condo in Florida, attempting to launch a new venture that no one would fund. Tiffany Sterling, after her lawsuit was summarily dismissed, had disappeared from the social scene, her 15 minutes of infamy having expired. The Starlight Collier had been quietly returned to Cartier. Penelope was a constant welcome presence, a doting aunt to Nicholas, who arrived with organic baby food and scandalous art world gossip in equal measure. Their relationship had rekindled slowly, cautiously built, not on the ashes of her old life, but on the solid ground of their shared history and mutual respect. There was no pressure, no expectation. He would come over for dinner, hold Nicholas, with a natural ease that surprised them both, and talk with Catherine for hours about everything and nothing. One evening, as they sat in the quiet living room, the baby sleeping peacefully in his bassinet by the fireplace, Sebastian looked at her. "Do you ever miss it?" The glamour, the galas, the power, Catherine considered the question. She remembered the gnawing emptiness that had been her constant companion. Then she looked around her cozy living room, at the overflowing bookshelves, the half-finished painting on an easel in the corner. She had started painting again, and the sleeping baby who was the center of her universe. "I didn't have power, Sebastian," she said, her voice clear and certain. She met his gaze, a warm, genuine smile, gracing her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Choosing my own life. Building a real home. Raising my son in peace." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady. It wasn't a gesture of possession or passion, but of deep, abiding friendship that was slowly, beautifully blooming into something more. It was a promise not of a gilded cage, but of an open door. A few years later, the door opened to a life she never could have dreamed of. She had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in carats or square footage, but in moments of quiet joy and unwavering support. She had walked through the fire of a public betrayal and emerged not burned, but forged. She was a mother, an artist, a survivor, and for the first time in a very long time, she was free. Could you have been as brave as she was? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.